87.
Don't make a video.
Asciamene, 61. 69.
59. Do you have a check down there? On the left?
6060.
Oh, कुछ नहीं आया.
Uncle.
Yeah, Rob! Yeah!
I can do this.
6. Maybe do it one more time if you're doing just that. Yes. 1. Nice and tall. Head up. 3. Woo! She really wants to be part of the show. Okay.
Hey. La gente che non molla siamo noi. La gente che non molla siamo noi. La gente come noi non molla mai. La gente come noi non molla mai. La gente come noi. La gente come noi. La gente come noi non molla mai.
Bir kilo pırasa. Şimdi bizim çarşamba pazarında fasulye gördüm. Taze fasulye çıkmış. Yarım kilo da taze fasulye.
We bid you welcome, those who come with weary spirit seeking rest, those of you who come with hope in your hearts, those who come with a longing for connection. We welcome you to the home, virtual home of the Calgary Unitarians. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your sexual or theological orientation, wherever you are on your journey of faith or your search for meaning, you are welcome here. If you're here for the first time, we invite you to join us for coffee after the service, and we offer a special welcome. Wherever you are located, please recognize those on whose traditional land you may be. Here in Calgary, I acknowledge those of the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta, the people of the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation Region 3, and we acknowledge that we are all treaty people, all respecting and honoring our relationships with each other and with the land. As Calgary Unitarians, we come together to build beloved community, a community of radical inclusion. Guided by our Unitarian principles and sources, we seek to grow in wisdom, to welcome and deepen relationships, and to act for a just and sustainable world. When we gather, we create a sacred space. We make it tangible with our intention and by lighting our chalice. A chalice lit in our midst holds the warmth that we offer each other and sheds its light to brighten the lives of those who are gathered in the circle and beyond. It is a beacon of love and justice. Brought together for this hour, holding this intention, we light our chalice flame. And now over to Jane Eburn.
The inspiration for this service started at our Wednesday evening social hour about a month ago, when I was talking about some of the methods the Italians had used during the Renaissance to combat the plague. I also mentioned a great book, Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks, that I had read about how a UK village fought about the plague in the 17th century. And as it turned out, one of our social hour attendees that evening, Catherine Burwash, had actually visited that UK village and told us her story that night. Reverend Deborah, who was with us at that social hour, at that point suggested that we had the makings of a fine Sunday service, and voila, here we are a month later. And now to Jane Perry.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to be together with you again in this virtual space. So we're talking about the spirituality of quarantine this morning, and part of that I'm finding is the ability to find again that inner strength to keep going day to day in this time of isolation. Our first song is all about that. I know I can go on. So let's sing this together. The words will be up on your screen shortly. So you
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sheila McMaster, the Director of Religious Education here at the Calgary Unitarians. And some of you know me and you say that every week, Sheila, but we have people tuning in from Perth, Australia, and right across the country. We are now international, which I think is very exciting. You might be wondering, what are the children and youth doing this week? Well, this week the children are doing creation stories. So Blackfoot, Greek, Norse, Celtic, and then they're going to write their own origin stories. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. And the youth, we're looking at the question of how do we connect with family and friends when we're apart. So we're going to be doing a heart activity, and like we do every week, we try out a new game so we can connect with each other. And this week, I was thinking about the spirituality of quarantine and what have I learned during this time of isolation. And for me, it's not to put off to tomorrow what I can do today. And I thought, what is it that I've been wanting to do for so long And the answer is go to Disney World. I've been wanting to go to Disney World for like, 10 years. 10 years I want to go to Disney World. And my daughter Morgan's now 9, and I thought, it'll be a few more years. And I thought, wait, why am I putting off till tomorrow what I can do today? So today, I'd like to share with you the trip that we took to Disney World from home. So I've got my sunglasses here, and I got my hat, and I've been wearing this all week. And I got a sunburn when I went on our virtual trip to Disney World, in part because I've been gardening. And just so you know, this protects you to here. So you want to sunscreen the jowls. Just a tip, sunscreen the jowls so you don't get sunburned. So I'm going to share with you our trip, and I'm going to screen share here. There we go. So this is our slideshow for Disney from home. All right, so first we made Disney pancakes. You can make these too. You just put a blob in the middle and then 2 ears. This is my most successful mouse one. Here we are. This is me and Morgan with the same scenery, posing in our tropical outfits. But you can also, Photoshop yourself right into the park. And there we are with the Disney World castle behind us. Here's me and Paula at Epcot. Wow, that was a fun day. And this is what we actually did. We put our 2 couches together, and then we put ourselves in front of the screen, and you can YouTube watch all the rides, first-person rides. So we did, Splash Mountain, and we did Tinkerbell, and all sorts of fun rides. And we also did lots of fun snacks. So my favorite part, I went to Disneyland a few years ago, and you can get 2-foot corn dogs. And me and Paula would eat our corn dog, and then we walk a few feet, and then we say, let's have another corn dog. So we ordered some frozen corn dogs, put them in the microwave for a minute. You got pogos, some popcorn, and it's just like being at Disney, I tell you. And the fun doesn't have to stop there. Disney isn't done in one day. So next week, we're going to be making churros, and you can make churros at home with just stuff you have at home, and you just need a star tip icing tip, and you can make churros at home. And I haven't seen the Haunted Mansion yet or the fireworks. So those are coming up next week. So I hope I've inspired some of you to take your own trips at home during this time, because it can be a lot of fun. And now back to you, Lynn.
We'll spend a few minutes of our time together this morning to center and quiet ourselves. Breathing deeply and slowly, letting the words, the silence, and the music wash over us. We'll follow this with our candles of care. If you have a joy or concern and have not already shared it by email with Reverend Deborah or the caring team, I invite you to write it in the chat box for Catherine Burwash, a member of our caring team, to read during the candle lighting. Our centering words this morning are likely familiar to many of you, although I have taken the liberty of altering them slightly to make them more inclusive. They are from poet John Donne, born in London in 1572 and died in London in 1631. According to the Museum of London, London had nearly 40 plague outbreaks between 1348 and 1665. This was Donne's reality. At the time of burials, a plague bell would ring for 15 minutes to remind people to follow the plague prevention rules. Rules that really don't make a lot of sense by modern scientific standards, but officials of the day were trying to prevent further spread of the plague by the best means that they knew how at the time. Reading about plague bells makes me wonder if it was more than church bells that Donne was referencing in his poem. No person is an island, entire of itself. Each is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. As well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thine own, or of thine friends were. Each person's death diminishes me, for I am involved in humankind. Therefore, send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. We will now have a few moments of silence, followed by musical interlude.
Hello, I'm Catherine Burwash of the Caring Team. We come seeking community. We come together to share the events of our lives. We come to find welcome, support, and inspiration. We come to share and explore the big questions of life. For all this and so much more, we come together. We recognize ourselves as part of the interdependent web of existence, affirming that what touches the life of one of us affects us all. We widen our caring ministry by sharing the concerns, joys, and milestones of our individual lives, our congregational life, and the worldwide community. We light our first candle of global concern for this ongoing pandemic with all of its many challenges and hardship. We hold the following people in our caring thoughts. We light a candle of comfort for these concerns expressed aloud, and for those held in the silence of our hearts. We also have joys and milestones to share. for all of the birthdays in May we celebrate. We're also thankful for all the guests among us, and we invite you to coffee time following the service. We light the candle of joy for all that has been spoken aloud, and for all those joys we hold in the silence of our hearts. One of our greatest joys we have is to get to know one another better. So Ross Watson, a member of our congregation, has kindly agreed to share his experiences with us. Thanks, Ross.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Unitarians. I'm relatively new to the home of the Unitarians. About 2.5 years ago, my wife, Delina, and myself were looking for a new spiritual home. We'd been Baha'is for 12 years, and although we appreciated the values of equality and social justice, the Baha'i faith did have a doctrine, and we found ourselves bumping up against the edges of those doctrines. So we needed to find a spiritual community that allowed us our individual freedoms, but yet was principled and had a sense of community. Now, I want to share a bit of a story with you. It's about a friend of mine. His name was Kim Vaness, and he was at various times the director of NGOs that work to bring healthcare, food, and education and economic opportunities to third world countries. Now, I'd hiked with Kim for 5 or 6 years, and sitting down one time during a hike, I found out that at one point in his life, he was an ordained minister, and that while working in third world countries as a minister, he saw the overwhelming need for these tangible items in people's lives, like food, medicine, and education. So he decided to work helping to provide those. Then he ended by saying, I suppose I just needed a bigger God. And that's sometimes how I felt about the Baha'i faith. It was very open, but it is how I feel about the home of the Unitarians. It is principled, has a sense of community. It allows us to find our individual way and our own spirituality. So we became quite comfortable in the home of the Unitarians and with the open philosophy and principled stance of the Unitarians. Now, I had worked at one point in my life with the Human Rights Commission, and we toured the province. This is a little while ago, to find out people's views on including sexual orientation as a protected grounds in the Alberta Human Rights Act, and also the rights of the child. Now, to me, it seemed that these were just things and would be received well. But there were certain elements of our society that were immensely opposed to both of them. And I recognized that for a lot of people, they saw giving rights to other people as losing their rights. With the rights of the child, they felt that interfered with the rights of the family. With sexual orientation, they felt that that may encroach on their beliefs and their spiritual beliefs. So recognizing that to work in a community that promoted social justice, understood the fears of other people, and worked to allay those fears was noble. And that's how I see the home of the Unitarians. So thank you very much for allowing me to share this with you. And now I would like to pass it to Jane for a musical interlude. Thank you very much.
The next song we're going to sing together is a hymn that's well loved by this congregation called When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. We're blessed with love and amazing grace when our heart is in a holy place. Let's sing together. The words will be on screen shortly for you.
This morning, our reflections will be presented in 3 parts. We will go back in history and visit some pandemics of the past. The first story was written by Katie Hodges-Cluck, who's the program coordinator and research associate for the Marco Institute for Medieval and Renaissance Studies at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Katie shares with us an inspiring account of the plague in Syria in the 14th century. She writes, "One of the most striking examples of a community uniting under duress comes from 14th century writer, the Moroccan Berber adventurer Ibn Battuta. He chronicled his 29 years of traveling some 75,000 miles around the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. The book is commonly known as The Journey. In this book, Ibn Battuta described the arrival of the plague in Syria in 1348. During this time of tribulation, he writes, the citizens of Damascus did not abandon one another or persecute the minority Jews and Christians. Instead, the citizens of Damascus set aside their differences. Members of the city's various faith groups, Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike, from children to political leaders, united in their effort to protect the city. Ibn Battuta explains how all the various people of the city came together and processed through the streets. The Muslims carried aloft copies of the Quran, Jews brought out the Torah, and Christians brandished the Bible in a united appeal to God to save their city. The result, Ibn Battuta argued, is that Damascus had significantly fewer fatalities than other cities. Now, today, we know better than to hold large public gatherings during pandemics. Ibn Battuta did not know the modern scientific reasons for social distancing. And yet, he pointed to a communal ethos of overcoming differences in a time of trouble that probably helped Damascus respond and still resonates today. In the face of the pandemic, the Syrians of Damascus demonstrated that the best response is to combine our resources, share our knowledge, and remember our common humanity. Now, with a little bit of music to guide us on our way, we will join Jane Ebbern and Journey to Italy.
There is a sad irony that Italy showed the rest of the world how to efficiently handle disease epidemics like the plague in the late medieval and Renaissance period. And yet today, due to slow containment this time around, the effects of COVID-19 have been absolutely devastating on the wonderful country of Italy. The very word quarantine comes from the Italian words 40 giorni, which means 40 days. It's not known exactly why 40 days was chosen, but it may have had something to do with the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert. The belief then was that 40 days was the time required for isolation, fumigation, and disinfection. This practice began during the 14th century to protect coastal Italian cities from plague epidemics. Ships arriving in Venice from infected ports were required to sit at anchor for 40 days before landing. Venice was also the first to develop isolated, specialized hospitals to contain and treat plague victims. These hospitals, called lazaretti, were located far enough from centers of habitation to restrict the spread of disease, ideally separated from centers by natural barriers like water, but still close enough to transport the sick quickly. The first Venice Lazaretto was built on a small island close to the main city. Later, in the 15th century, Venice also developed a port management system for disease. This not only closed ports to any arrivals from known plague areas, but also interrogated any suspected plague boats. When observers saw boats in the distance arriving from possible plague-infected areas, they would signal with a flag. Before the boat would be allowed to approach shore, the captain was taken in a lifeboat to the health magistrate's office and kept in an enclosure where he spoke through a window an example of early physical distancing. So the conversation took place at a safe separation. The captain had to prove that the sailors and passengers were healthy and show the origin of merchandise. If there was any suspicion of disease, the captain was ordered to the quarantine station where passengers, crew, and merchandise were isolated, fumigated, and retained for 40 days. During the plague of 1629 to 1631, Florence showed remarkable leadership in disease management. German mercenaries brought this plague in the autumn of 1629 when they marched down from the north. The natural barrier of the Apennine Mountains gave Florence some time to protect itself. At this time, the plague, or pest as it was called, was thought to spread through corrupt air, on the breath of the sick, or trapped in soft materials like cloth or wool. The Florentine Health Board, called the Sanità, at first tried to implement what's called a cordon sanitaire, or a travel barrier across the mountain passes of the Apennines to stop the plague. But too many people slipped through, and the plague came to Florence anyway. By October, over 1,000 Florentines were dead, buried in big pits outside the city. The Sanità opened lazaretti, or quarantine centers for the sick and dying, commandeering many monasteries and villas outside of Florence. By January of 1631, so many had died that a general quarantine was announced, locking the majority of citizens in their homes for at least 40 days under threat of fines and of punishment. Ordinary life was suspended. Schools, churches, public celebrations, carnival, and workplaces were completely shut down. The poor were particularly hard hit by this quarantine order due to the economic depression and years of famine that had preceded the disease. The Sanità considered the poor to be both defenseless victims, but also walking, breathing propagators of the plague. In order to keep them at home, the Sanità knew that they had to be provided for. And here the Sanità showed great leadership, providing food, wine, medicine, and firewood to all needy quarantined people at public expense. While some fraternities also provided medical care here, the bulk of the quarantine cost was borne by the city government. As much as the Sanità was compassionate in spending on food and medicine, it also made strong use of its police and court system to very strictly enforce this quarantine and was merciless in punishing those who broke it. The dreaded disease finally waned in the spring of 1631, and by June of that year, there was even a parade of celebration. In the final tally of plague victims, Florence lost only 12% of their population during this epidemic, compared to 46% in Milan and 61% in Verona. In Florence, fast containment, backed with a strong public spending program and strong quarantine enforcement, helped save the day for Florence. These are good lessons for today. And now, with a little bit of music, we will go to Catherine Burwash and the United Kingdom.
I want to tell you a true story. It's about the brave people of a small village called Eyam in England. They have become my heroes for how they chose to respond when the plague arrived in their homes in 1665. The bubonic plague had been ravishing Europe, and thousands of people had already died in London in 1665. In August of that same year, it spread to Eyam, which is a small village in Derbyshire, and it was carried through some fleas on a bale of cloth that this tailor unwittingly brought to the town. The pestilence quickly spread through the whole village, and 42 people were dead between September and the following spring in 1666. Many people were just so scared they were ready to flee the village to save themselves, but that would have spread the plague. So the newly appointed Anglican rector, which is the minister, whose name was William Mompesson, he decided he had to intervene. He strongly believed it was his Christian duty to prevent the plague from spreading to the nearby towns and cities of Sheffield and Bakewell. But the only way to do that was to quarantine the entire village. So that's a difficult task, but it was made doubly difficult by the fact that he wasn't liked at all, because he had displaced the former rector, whose name was Thomas Stanley, over some political differences of the time. But despite their differences, Mompesson convinced Stanley to meet with him. And they did, put aside their differences, and devised a plan for quarantine. So, you know, they didn't have grocery stores or pharmacies or even Amazon to deliver any supplies in those days. So they thought, what are we going to do? Let's talk to the Earl of Devonshire. He lives in Chatsworth in this big castle. And he agreed. The Earl agreed that he would send food and any supplies they needed as long as the villagers did their part and agreed to abide by the quarantine. So in June 24th, 1666, Mompesson decided to have a meeting with his parishioners, and he wisely did it outdoors. He wanted to convince them that they must be quarantined. No one allowed in or out, just a total lockdown. So you can imagine how that would go over in one of our congregational meetings. I'm so glad it's not on the agenda today. So not surprisingly, there were just so many misgivings over the wisdom of this plan. But the Reverend Stanley helped persuade the villagers. He argued about the principle of cordon sanitaire. But Mompesson, I think, saved the day by pledging that he's going to stay, that he would do everything in his power to alleviate their suffering, and he would stay with the villagers to the bitter end. You have to realize this was really choosing a death sentence for everyone, because the mortality rate of the bubonic plague is 30% to 70%. I think his willingness to sacrifice his own life undoubtedly convinced all the reluctant villagers. So they proceeded with their quarantine. In August of 1666, they saw the highest number of victims, sometimes 5 or 6 people a day, and entire families were wiped out. Despite that, nobody broke quarantine. Even those who were originally reluctant to stay, they saw it through. A local historian wrote, "It's almost overwhelming to think what it must have been like. I suspect that fear stalked them every day of their lives at the time." But the number of cases gradually fell, and by the 1st of November, the disease had gone. The quarantine had worked. In just over a year, 260 of the village's inhabitants had died. That might not sound like a lot, but the total population at the beginning was estimated between 350 and 800 people. Mr. Thompson, a local historian today, said, "Who would have thought they would have agreed to do that and put themselves and their families in mortal danger, so much so that at least a third of the population died. They knew they were risking life and limb, but they still agreed to do it. If it means anything at all, you almost feel responsible to do something to remember it, which we are today." Researching this story also helped me to experience our 7th principle of the interconnected web in a more deeper, fuller, complete way. I now see the web not only existing in the present with our choices affecting the future, but I see that same web reaching across time to the past. This story has some very deep personal significance for me because I visited Ian in 2010. But more importantly, my mother was born in Sheffield, which is only 24 kilometers away, and I have relatives living there today. I cannot help but wonder how the selfless actions of these everyday people of Ian affected so many people forward in time. The plague would have undoubtedly spread to Sheffield. My ancestors may have died, and I would not even have been born. I owe a debt to the people of Ian, perhaps my very existence. Thank you. And now over to Jane for our closing song.
Our final hymn for this morning is Our World is One World. What touches one affects us all, which is just another way of saying we're all in this together. Let's sing together. The words will be up on your screen shortly.
Our closing words this morning are from a poem, People Stayed at Home by Katie O'Meara. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced. Some met their shadows. And the people began to think differently. And the people healed, and in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed. As we extinguish our chalice this morning, may our connections with each other as a community bring light and love into our hearts and into our homes. May it be so. Please join Jane Perry for our closing benediction, Spirit of Life.